Hi everybody, welcome back. I want to do a video today. I'm kind of inspired by Randy Ray, the literate Texan, and he did a video where he just grabbed 7 nonfiction books off his bookshelf and just decided to talk about them. So I thought, oh, maybe I'll try that and try doing that and just talk about 7 random books and just kind of go from there. So I have 7 nonfiction books I'll talk about here. So the first one is one I always have around. This is the Rolling Stone Encyclopedia of Rock and Roll, and this is more of a reference book that has entries on rock bands, artists, but it also goes beyond rock into many other different genres. And like I said, there's been different editions of this book. I know growing up in the 90s in my house, we had this book in the house, and I remember I would page through it all the time and read entries for different bands. The thing was, in the 90s though, you would read about these bands, but you really could not access the music. You know, this was pre-internet, pre-streaming and all that. So I remember like reading about a band like Big Star in here, and it took me a long time. It took me years before I was able to actually listen to a band like Big Star. You know, a power pop band based in Memphis, Alex Chilton, and just a very influential band. And I remember, this book introducing me to Big Star, and like, this is the first sentence of the entry on Big Star. Big Star's combination of Beatles-style melody, Who-like punch, and birdsy harmonies defined power pop before the term for an audience for it, existed. So yeah, that was one of the values of this book. I know today with Wikipedia and everything, you can learn all about bands and artists and get their discographies and all that, but I wish I should look at this book more, because I can just page through it and usually discover someone new that I've never listened to before, and it's not written necessarily in Wikipedia way. It's written with somewhat more of a critical voice, and I guess that Rolling Stone style. So this is Encyclopedia of Rock and Roll. Set that down there. Next book I grabbed was Consider the Lobster, and other essays by David Foster Wallace. I haven't read David Foster Wallace in a long time. I know I did go through a phase where I was reading a lot of Wallace, probably in the early 2000 teens, around that time. Infinite Jest was a huge deal. I know this year is the 30th anniversary of Infinite Jest, and but I always kind of preferred Wallace's nonfiction writing to his fiction, and this book has one of his more famous essays, Consider the Lobster, which I have not read in a long time, and I did not pick that up to reread it yet. But I know there's some really funny essays in here, the journalism that Wallace was doing. Some of the essays I'm not so keen on. Like, there's this long essay on American usage that gets into linguistics and things like that, which I found somewhat less interesting. There's an article in here where Wallace was a political reporter for a brief time, covering, I think, John McCain's campaign. Maybe in 2000, or maybe it was before that, but so you do get a good selection of Wallace's writing. I know his reputation has really ebbed and flowed a lot. I know, of course, he died young, and there was initially a lot of he became like a legend almost, but then stuff came out about his personal life, specifically the way he treated women, his attitudes towards women, raised a lot of controversies. But I've been looking around lately. Last night I was just kind of Googling articles. It seems like there's been a resurgence in interest in Wallce, and I know there's still a strong fan base for his works. I even think there's an academic conference every year on Wallce. So yeah, and yeah. So this book's probably as good as introduction as any to the writings of David Foster Wallace. Let's see. Grab this book. This is Anti-Intellectualism in American Life by Richard Hofstadter. This book was published in 1964. It won the Pulitzer Prize for nonfiction in 1964. I've not read this book in a long time, too. Hofstadter was always a favorite of mine. He was an academic historian, but he was really good writer, really good, really sharp on writing, and I guess kind of considered like a one of the strong liberal voices of the 50s and 60s, no doubt. And this book is written post McCarthyism, and it really gets into a lot of this book gets into the educational system in America, and it gets into issues of religion and politics and how Americans feel about education, feel about experts, and how anti-science, anti-intellectual ideas develop. I never hear Hofstadter cited too much on BookTube, or maybe I'm just not looking. But yeah, this is a really critical look at like 50s, 60s culture in America, and reading through it, I'm sure a lot of it will still hit hard today, considering the current political climate that we're in. So yeah, I definitely due for a reread on this, and I'm pretty sure a lot of it probably holds up very well, even though it is a lot of the references are from the 50s and 60s. So that's the Hofstadter book. I guess let's see. This was another sort of a reference book of a type. This is Safire's Political Dictionary. William Safire was a speechwriter famously for Richard Nixon, and he later became, I guess, a pundit, a columnist for the New York Times. I remember when I started reading the New York Times, probably in the 2000s, Safire was still a columnist. I know back then you could get the New York Times for free, emailed to you every day, but of course they've paywalled it since. But this book, anyway, it is what it is. Like, it's a dictionary of political terminology, and it's really in depth. You get like just to kind of look one up here, like dustbin of history, that phrase that's used a lot, and Safire will give you the origin of the phrase, how the phrase has been used by different politicians throughout time. And so you get a lot of history of language, history of political rhetoric, and how it's used. I know some of this in here might be dated. I think this was in the 2000s. This edition was made, but like I said, I should read through this more. But if you are interested in like political rhetoric and how it's been used and the origins of it and how certain phrases enter the language, it is a very informative book on those grounds. If you're interested in politics, I guess the rest of these books kind of deal with music. I picked up. So let's see. This was a book called Springsteen as Soundtracked by Carolyn Madden. The Sound of the Boss in Film and Television. So this book was about how Bruce Springsteen's music has been used in movies and TV, and it's been used a lot. So if you're interested in film music and how music is used in film, how pop music or rock music is used in movies, it's kind of a niche topic. Maybe you have to be a fan of Springsteen to appreciate it, but yeah, it's a good book. It was put out by McFarland, publisher. They always are putting out some interesting work. I remember I interviewed the author for this book when it came out, and I remember I posted it on my blog, and I remember having a good interview. She was very friendly, very forthcoming with talking about her book, and I do remember that. So, and I know she's written some more books since this one came out. But yeah, if you're a fan of movies or Springsteen, this is a book to consider. Another music book here. This is called Mystery Train by Griel Marcus. It was a very famous rock critic, well known. Images of America and rock and roll music, and it's been forever since I've read this book. It has a very ambitious thesis and arguments about how rock music in particular tells us a lot about the American character, about American history, and just some really intense cultural analysis in here. And Marcus kind of looks at it through four different artists. You can kind of see on the cover here, Sly and the Family Stone at the top, the band, and then Elvis Presley and Randy Newman. He talks about other artists as well, but he really focuses on the work of these four and how they've contributed to our understanding of the American character. And so I remember it being just such a really thought-provoking book, and one that I definitely need to reread again sometime soon. So it's Mystery Train. And let's see, the last one I'll talk about is another music-themed book, A Cultural Dictionary of Punk by Nicholas Rombes is the author. And I used to read this book a lot. It is structured like a reference book, okay? And it's a book about the history of punk, where you get entries on various important figures and events in punk rock. Some of the entries aren't necessarily related to punk specifically, but a lot of connections are made. So there is kind of the stream of consciousness quality to the book. I know, like, there's short stories within here. He wrote short stories, I think, about the entry in Patti Smith. Instead of writing about her, he just kind of wrote a short story about the music of Patti Smith, or things like that. So, but it's also very much a history book about the 1970s and the cultural climate that punk came out of, and the 70s being this really unique decade where there was this sense of decline. There was a sense of boredom happening throughout culture, but also a sense of that the future didn't look so bright as maybe it had been in the past. And there's these ongoing themes throughout the book. And Rombes also writes about science fiction novels and popular novels and movies of the time that all kind of contribute to this conversation about punk, and where it came from, its peak in the late 70s, and then its decline in the 1980s, or I guess if you call it a decline, although the genre is still going strong. So it's a really unconventional type of history book with a lot of cultural criticism as well. I used to follow the author. I know he's a professor of English. He used, way back in the day on Twitter, I used to follow him. I went off Twitter a long time ago, but I remember he was always posting cool stuff on Twitter and even interacting with him a little bit. And this is a book you just kind of pick up randomly and just start reading, and you'll find something interesting if this topic is something that interests you. So yeah, I guess that wraps it up. Those are 7 nonfiction books I kind of randomly pulled from my shelves. Again, thanks to Randy for the idea, and thanks for watching, and I will talk to you later. Bye.